So when we start to screen for motivation, I've broken it down into 4 categories. Some people have like 5, some people have 7. I always break stuff. I break it down into these 4 categories that I look for in motivation. Yep. So these are the 4 main categories that I screen for motivation. So there's a physical motivation, everyone has a financial motivation, everybody has an emotional motivation, and then there's sometimes a spiritual motivation. So those are the 4 main big high level points that we look at. And then from there, depending on what their needs are and what they say and how they react to questions, that's when we sort of delve down the motivational funnel. So if you kind of look at it, if you were to flip this and put everything down this way, it's kind of I guess it's the opposite of funnel. It pushes everything into a smaller category the further you go down. So some examples that we use. So say there's a physical need that someone needs to sell the house. Maybe they're elderly. So elderly would be the house is too big, they need to downsize, or they've raised a family in it, they don't need a house that big anymore, anything like that. Or maybe another physical need is they need to physically relocate. Say they got a job in Kentucky and they need to move from Indiana to Kentucky, or they're moving out to the West Coast or to the East Coast. So they physically need to relocate. That's a pretty big motivator for them. Or another one that we see is there's a lot of people that we deal with that have either picked up a flip, they think it's going to be easy, rehab gets too big, or they get halfway through, or maybe they haven't even started the project yet and they realize, hey, this is too big of a project for me, I need to get out of here, I need to just let it go because the physical side of the rehab's too large. And that kind of directly ties into the second motivator that we look at is financial. Are they in some sort of financial distress, whether that be they're getting ready to get foreclosed on, they know that they're behind on payments, or maybe they're not behind on payments, but maybe their mortgage is just too high and they don't have the cash flow they need every month to pay that mortgage, pay their other bills, stuff like that. So their mortgage is too high, they want to downsize because it's going to give them a little bit more freedom and more cash in their pocket at the end of every month. Another thing too, maybe those people who picked a rehab that was too big for them, maybe the rehab number is too high. Or if you're dealing with a homeowner, maybe that rehab they want to do themselves, which I feel like everybody on this call has probably heard, yeah, I'm just going to do the rehab myself. I'm like, okay, that's great. That's great. Are you actually going to do it? Do you have funds to do a $40,000 rehab? Probably not. Most people nowadays don't have that kind of money sitting around. I was reading an article a couple weeks ago, and I think it said it was like 30 or 40% of Americans have like $470 in their savings account or less, which is terrifying to me. But wow. Yeah, it's a very, very high number, and a lot of people don't have the money they need to do these projects. And just kind of knowing that, I will blatantly ask people, okay, you say you want to take on this rehab project. Do you have $30,000 at your discretion to use for this project? That's a big question for a lot of people. A lot of people don't. Some people do, and some people actually see the project through, but in my years of doing this, that is very, very few and far between. Another financial motivator that we see a lot is something catastrophic happened in their life and they need money ASAP, whether it's medical bills or their car died and they need a new car to get to work. And you know what? We have a little bit of equity in the house. Let's cash it in. Let's get some money in our pocket and go. So sometimes people just need the funds immediately. And then another financial stressor, like I said, these are kind of just general. These are motivators and general objections and qualifiers that I've seen throughout the years that I just kind of put on paper. Is a tenant not paying? So, I mean, if you own a bunch of rental properties and your tenants stop paying, that becomes a pretty big financial motivator for you, because instead of your tenants paying the mortgage, you're paying the mortgage. And that's the whole opposite thing of what you do to get into it if you want rental properties. So we see that a lot from landlords of, you know, my tenant stopped paying, or tenant just moved out and they are ready to just be done with it. It's sitting vacant, and everybody knows that a vacant house loses money. A vacant house does not make you money by any means. And then we start to get into more of the emotional side of things. Finances definitely play an emotional part for a lot of people. Like, they'll feel drained by it. They're overwhelmed by the amount of finances or debt that they might have on a property and just want to get out from under it. But other emotional things that we see is They inherited the house from mom or dad. Mom or dad passed away. It's time to move on. They got the house in the estate, or you have to walk them through probate. They're just ready to sell it. So an inherited house, or a lot of things we see also with an inherited house is there's a lot of sentimental value with it, which obviously we as investors know, like, I get it. You had your first kiss and your first dog in this house, but that doesn't make it $10,000 more valuable. It just doesn't work like that. So we see that a lot. And then, or the kids moving out. That's another one we see. That also is physical for downsizing. That's also financial, of the house is probably too big and the mortgage is bigger. Typically, the bigger the house, the higher the mortgage. Kids moved out, ready to downsize. Or another big emotional one we get is a divorce. And sometimes they're court ordered to sell it immediately or take it to market, whatever that may be. But we see that divorce is one that we see a lot. And then spiritual one is a little more ethereal, you could say, but definitely we deal with some people who are playing in that realm a little bit more. There are some people who have been like, yeah, God told me to move, which I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that's totally fine. Or some people, there was one guy we dealt with a couple weeks ago. He bought the house 4 months ago. And he's like, man, ever since I moved into this house, it just doesn't feel good. I shouldn't have bought it. I need to sell it immediately. So that kind of goes into the not the right vibe, or it doesn't make them happy, or they don't want to be there. So the whole point of all of these things is when you're talking with sellers, I like to get into these questions of, okay, so, you know, you told me about 123 Main Street. It's roughly 3 bedrooms, it's about 1,500 square feet. So, you know, what's really behind you pushing to move, you know? Is there something like, is the house too big? Is it too expensive for you? Are there some like attachment issues with the house? Like, I try to dig into these, and my team will often have this pulled up. We have a little bit more in-depth chart with a lot of different, like, if this then this type thing, but this is the high level. But they have that chart pulled up, and when they're on an intake call, even if it's the first call, if they feel good about that call, they'll dive into this just to get as much motivation as possible. So that way we can start to take note, put that seller story together for when we present the offer. So we'll go through, if they don't want to talk, we're not going to push them through it. We're not going to try to beat them up to get them to answer the questions. It's just not worth it. But, you know, if they're open and willing to talk, we'll try to get as many of these motivators out of them as possible. Because more often than not, you're going to deal with like 2 to 3 of these is pretty common. A lot of people will have a physical need, a financial need, and an emotional need. So one that's like super common for us is it's emotional need. It's a sentimental value of the house because they raised the kids in it, but the kids moved out. And because of that, the mortgage is too high. They're getting older, they've retired, and then physically they need to downsize because they can't utilize the space in the house too much. So oftentimes all of these motivators get paired together, at least 2 to 3 of them from what I've seen over the years.